Welcome to a short introduction to A-level English literature. So if you're asking yourself, why study English literature? It's worth thinking about the study of literature as being a study into the human psyche. So how humans think and feel, to the human experience over time and social influences that have affected people over the years. This is a really well-known quotation from Shakespeare, and he said, "We are all men in our own natures, frail and capable of our flesh. Few are angels." And I just think that's really interesting, and I love that quotation because I think it reveals something about the complexity of the human condition and the fact that we all have light and darkness within us. And that's really what art is about, exploring those ideas. And that's what literature is as well. So if you're interested in those things, then A-level English literature could be the course for you. What you can see here on the screen is some of the earlier centuries and the earlier years of what's known as the literary tradition. Now, the literary tradition is really just the way that literature has evolved over time. And as you can see, English literature, such as we know it, really begins in the 1000s, about a millennium ago. And of course, goes right up to the present day. And a study of the literary tradition can help a student to understand not just literature, but history as well, and identify some of the key trends and the key events that have shaped our past and present society. So if you're fascinated by the events and the forces that have shaped our society, and by what drives human actions and human decision making, then English literature could be for you. What we've got here on the screen now are the later centuries of the literary tradition. In the A-level that we study some texts from the 1600s. We also study work from the 1800s, the 1900s, and the 2000s. When you're studying English, you will very, very quickly realise, as you probably already do, that any text is the product of its time. And a study of any text will teach you to read in context and to understand the influences that drive an author and that shape the text that they produce. Studying English at A-level will give you the ability to read any content with a deeper appreciation of these things, and you will also develop investigation as an essential skill that will become incredibly important as you progress through the A-level. So let's have a little look at where English literature can take you if you're wondering whether or not it's right for you. English literature is one of what the Russell Group universities call a facilitating subject. And what that means is that choosing a facilitating subject at A-level will allow you quite a wide range of options for degree study, and English literature is a really great A-level to have for that reason. If you want to study English at degree level, it can be a very important subject for that. You will require an English A-level to study English at degree level, if that's what you're thinking of doing. It's also very important for some drama courses, some media studies courses, for degrees like American Studies, and actually law as well. A lot of these courses will also ask for an A-level in English literature or English language. It's worth bearing in mind that English is really useful if you want to take a degree that involves languages, whether that's the classics with French or other modern languages. If you are thinking of going into teacher training, if you're thinking of studying history or the history of art or politics or religious studies, it's really important and can be really, really useful for people who are thinking of going on and studying these subjects. English is really widely recognised by universities as a degree that develops transferable skills. And in fact, some universities say that English is the subject that develops the most transferable skills, skills that are among the most transferable of all A-levels. And this is also reflected in the careers that English graduates often go on to pursue. So there's a few examples there. Some of the most popular are working in spheres like publishing, broadcasting, marketing and PR, journalism, law, teaching and politics. So hopefully, if those are areas that you're interested in, you might be inspired to study English at A-level. So let's talk a little bit more about what we study on the course. We study the AQA exam board, and despite our great love for Shakespeare, it's not all Shakespeare. We have a whole range of texts that we study. These texts that you see on the screen are the key texts that we study at the moment. We have some freedom to change and develop those over time, but this is what the course looks like presently. So we have two key themes, and those themes are tragedy and crime. So within tragedy, we study the background and history of tragedy. We study Othello by Shakespeare, and we also study another Shakespeare play called Richard II. Thirdly, in that kind of category, we study The Great Gatsby, a 20th century novel by F. Scott Fitzgerald. So there's really quite a bit of variety there in the way that we look at tragedy. There's also a really exciting unit on the literature of crime. And that's something that we've recently introduced and our current students are really enjoying and finding very interesting. As with all of our literature, we try to give you a really thorough introduction to the course and a grounding in some of the key ideas and contexts. So we do a really thorough introduction to crime writing, and we look at a range of unseen texts throughout that. You will study a poetry anthology, a crime poetry anthology. You'll study two novels. At present, these are Atonement by Ian McEwan and Brighton Rock by Graham Greene. We'll also look at Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens and some of the crime elements in that. One thing that a lot of students really enjoy about the A-level is some of the freedom that comes with the coursework, with what we call the non-examined assessment. And as you can see at the bottom of the screen there is some freedom in what you choose to focus on and write about for the non-examined assessment. In the strand of the course that we do, the non-examined assessment is linked to literary theory. So if you're thinking of going on to study at degree level, it's really important you have an understanding of literary theory, and this is a great grounding in that. So let's just look at a little bit more detail about some of the texts that we study and some of the themes we look at. What you see on the screen here is always going to be selective, and I'm not going to look at all the texts, but I thought it'd be interesting to talk about a few of them and some of the key themes and ideas. When we study Othello, we look at a whole range of themes, and some of them are on the slide there. So we look at jealousy, we look at marriage, we look at racism, alienation, outsiders, identity, civilization and savagery. Some really, really interesting themes. We look at what's called the early modern context, which was the time at which the play was written. You may recognise some of the things on the screen. We revisit Aristotle's concept of tragedy, which you will have looked at when studying Macbeth. We don't just look at Othello, we actually look at other revenge tragedies as well from the same period. So we look at plays like The White Devil, The Revenger's Tragedy, The Duchess of Malfi, Hamlet and Titus Andronicus. And we also gain an understanding of Senecan tragedy as well. There are lots of things we think about in relation to tragedy, and you can see some of the others of those on the screen there. Another one of the key texts we study at the moment is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Now, this is very different to the Shakespeare. Really, really interesting. And we've got really a focus on the Roaring Twenties from the early 20th century and what's called the Jazz Age. And we look at things like the American consumer culture of the 1920s, themes like the American dream, use of setting to convey ideas of social mobility and the struggles that people faced, as well as the death of the American dream. We look at the character of Gatsby as a tragic hero, so we make those links between Shakespeare and F. Scott Fitzgerald, and we look at Tom Buchanan as the tragic villain. So it's a really nice counterpoint to those two other tragedies that we study and much more modern. Crime is an aspect of the course that a lot of students really, really enjoy. I talked about the fact that we always try to do a really thorough grounding and introduction to any aspect of the course. So when we start crime, we start with this introduction to crime writing, and we look at a whole range of things, and some of those again are on the screen for you to have a look at there. We look at things like setting, violence, murder, theft, detection, the detective and their nemesis, the detective and their sidekick, the justice system, the legal system. We look at the themes of crime, things like motive, love, money, suffering, remorse. Do people feel guilty when they commit crimes, and if so, why? We look at moral purpose, and we look at the restoration of order. We look at key periods in crime fiction as well. For example, we look at the origins of crime fiction and where that really began. We look at some early crime fiction from the 19th century, for example, The Hound of the Baskervilles by Arthur Conan Doyle. We look at crime linked to colonialism and ideas of foreigners and outsiders. We look at the interwar years in the 20th century, which is sometimes called the golden age of crime fiction. And we come right into the sort of more modern era, and we look at crime and postmodernism. So it's a really exciting aspect of the course, and it gives you a very good grounding to then go on and study some of the other texts we do. And I just want to talk about one of those here. Brighton Rock by Graham Greene. This is a text that we are very excited about teaching. It's a little bit different. It's quite dark, really, really interesting. As it sounds from the title, Brighton Rock is set in Brighton, and Graham Greene is famous for using setting to convey his ideas. His novels are often sort of set in this what's called this fictional place known as Greenland. And we look at how Brighton is vice-filled and dangerous. We look at themes like pursuit and violence. We also look at themes like youth, conscience, moral purpose, danger and death. We talk specifically about the dangers of youth and inexperience and how these can contribute to crime. We look at gang culture in the 1930s and 1940s and what some perceive to be the collapse of social order at that time and the collapse of some of the older and more traditional values. So it's a really great novel, and if you study the course, I'm sure you'll enjoy reading it. I talked a little bit before about the coursework, the non-examined assessment, and this is where you really get freedom to look at something that interests you. There are some constraints, and you have to select within certain boundaries, but you will get to select texts to write about. These will always be linked to an element of literary theory. So we'll introduce literary theory to you, we'll teach you all about that, and then you'll choose an element that you're interested in to write about in your non-examined assessment. And we've got some examples on the screen there. So you might choose to write about narrative theory or eco-critical theory, which is a really relevant one at the moment. You might choose feminist theory, you might choose Marxist theory. So it's very open, and this is often one of the parts of the course where students really thoroughly enjoy themselves and also really excel because they've selected something that they're really interested in. So I hope that's been useful to you, just as a little bit of an introduction. If you have any questions at all, please do come and talk to one of your English teachers. But I just wanted to return to this question. So why study English literature? We've talked about it being about the human psyche, human experience, and the social influences on people over the years. But it's more than that. If you love reading, if you love discussing ideas, if you love discovering new things, if you love understanding something about the lives of the people who've lived before you, then this could be the course for you. If you want to read and think and write about some of literature's great texts, then I would definitely recommend considering A-level literature. And of course, thinking ahead, if you're interested in a career or further study in sectors such as the arts, publishing, media, or the law, then this could be the course for you. Thank you for listening.